Hello, Eric.
Abhay, hello.
How are you?
Good.
Welcome to the conversation. Thank you for your time.
The last time we spoke was a number of years ago, and you were the little startup disaggregation company that could, but things have changed a lot in the last 5 years. Utilities are making pledges to go to zero carbon by 2030, by 2040, by 2050. EV penetration is going from a few percentage points to 30 percentage points in the United States. There's DSM programs, there's smart appliances, there's smart cities. And yet, despite all of these changes in the electrical utility industry, utilities need some help in engaging with their customers. Utility R&D spend, utility customer engagement has always been on the low side. And they need innovation from the outside to help them with their customer engagement. So tell us a little bit about how utilities have changed in the last 5 years and their sense of awareness and their absolute need to improve from the 10% engagement they have to something better than that.
Right. And a lot of things in that question. I'll start by saying when we met last time, you're right, we were a much smaller startup about almost five or 6 years back, right? We've obviously grown quite a bit after that and learned a lot working with almost 35 utilities, managing almost 25 million homes. And of course, that comes with a lot of learning. Utilities, they have the best of the interest in their heart. But obviously, they come from a background where, especially in North America, the regulated utilities they have consumers as captive audience. And when you have consumers as captive audience, organically, you don't spend as much time trying to retain them compared to the other services like Comcast and AT&T and whatnot. They're forced to invest in the customer interactions that make people love, because that's how you retain your business.
Of course.
Now, if you go to the deregulated markets, Texas or Europe or other parts of the world where they're retailers, there's competitive retail thing out there. They invest a lot more in the customer interaction out of sheer need to survive.
Just competitive necessity, right. For sure.
But what has changed in the last few years, or I would say in the coming next 5 years, is you have problems that utilities are going to face, which they will have to tackle only by becoming more customer focused. And I would say two of those problems are, one of them is EV, because electric vehicles are bought by consumers without consultation with their utility. I don't go to my utility and ask them, should I buy an EV? I go to the market and buy an EV. But as a result, these EVs are going to put load on the grid, which utilities are going to have to manage. So today, the penetration of EVs, like you said, is 1%. But if it's heading towards 30% in 2030, and somewhere in the middle at 10-15%, the question is, at what percentage adoption will the grid start seeing the big load impact? And that's when utility says, oh, I can't manage it. Now, regulators are not giving utilities the free money to make the grid bigger and heavier. So utilities now have to work with consumers to figure out, how do I get them to charge the car when I want them to charge and where I want them to charge?
You and I know that the EV industry is going to be going from 1 to 30%. Why are utilities unable to make 3 to 5 year plans with this knowledge in mind? And to give us an example of a situation in a crowded neighborhood like this, when 5 EVs are on a single circuit, what does the utility have to do? How does customer engagement have to change in the world of EVs?
Well, number one, I think utilities are already making those 3 to 5 year plans. It's just not visible at that scale yet because they are behind the scenes. But companies like us who are working with them on those 3 to 5 year plans know that they are already worried. So I would say probably 35 to 40% of the utilities already have a dedicated either renewables or EV group. And those groups are trying to figure out, how do I manage the charging load when the, pardon my language, shit hits the fan or load hits the grid, whatever, right? So that's happening beneath the surface. And we are working with a number of utilities to now the biggest roadblock they have. Okay, so you talked about how does customer engagement have to improve and why is it important?
In a world of 30% EV penetration.
Yeah. In the world of 30% EV penetration, they cannot survive without having consumer heavily participating in the so-called whatever utility platform to manage their cars, right? So they are already investing now. What has to happen is, first of all, utilities don't know who has EV. This is a private information. I bought an EV. I don't want that information to be sold by either the dealer or the car company or DMV to the utility. In fact, privacy is the biggest thing right now in the world, right? So how do utilities get this information? From their meters, from their own investment. Okay. They invested, let's say, a million home utility invested almost $1 billion in their smart meter infrastructure.
Which was paid for by the ratepayers,
by
for
us,
sure.
You and me.
So those are our meters that are providing this information.
That is right, absolutely right. We paid for it over 20 years. Now that information collected from the meter has the information on who has EV and who does not have. The part is somebody has to mine that information for utilities. So that's where the whole value of the data analytics come in. So now their data will give them the information on who has EV, who bought it, who is charging when, is it level 1 charger, level 2 charger? And that's where we or companies like us come into picture, who basically take their data, analyze the data and give the information back to utility. No privacy violation. Because that data belongs to utility. The meter belongs to utility. That data is a shared entity between consumer and utility. And utility is legally allowed to use that data for the purposes of running their business.
Okay.
Right. It is not shared with any third party for any money, monetization, nothing. So that's the key.
You talked about smart meters. We have this infrastructure. We paid for it since the Obama days of the metering loan guarantees that were meant to get us out of a financial disaster. We have this enormous, all of these installed meters that are pumping out information. And I'm just can't understand why any other industry in the world that sells a product to a customer would be crying tears of joy to have this vast amount of information, and yet utilities have to be sort of coerced into exploiting this information. It doesn't work unless we bring everybody along with us. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to address the wealthier, higher bill payers. But how can data work for people in apartments, in multifamily dwellings, in who are not in high incomes? Are the utilities looking at that, and are you helping in that?
The challenge is reaching to them. They're hard to reach. In fact, many utilities classify them as HTR, hard to reach category. Okay. So the biggest problem they have is, how do I identify and reach every such person who is classified under that category that you talked about? That is the hardest problem. At a macro level, like census data, zip code level income data, you can find that online and you can buy that. And you know that this zip code is on an average has 60% low and medium income. The question is exactly which homes, right? So what analytics does is it does create some machine learning algorithms to figure out the probability of people falling in that category. Like, we think this household is in 90% category of being a low and medium income versus this household is only at 10%. Mm-hmm. Okay. So their data can help a little bit, but ultimately the other things you do is you offer them, like, you don't ask a low and medium income person to say, hey, I have $1,000 off in this battery, because they will have to invest $8,000 of their own money. So you offer them things which are different. Hey, I have
time of usage program that can reduce your,
or I have $800 off on a $1,000 refrigerator. And now I'll tell you where data can help. People,
if you see that they have a bad functioning appliance, you
yes,
can get
exactly.
It, right?
If you can figure out that this household is in the low and medium income zip code, and this household has a very old refrigerator,
you can see the compressor going on
and off, but at a high level. So you know this person does not have the money to go buy a newer refrigerator. That's when you channel your higher incentive programs. So identifying homes to say this home has a very, very inefficient and old refrigerator. Okay, we got to help them, and very likely they're in that area.
And you can do that without violating a privacy law?
Yes, because the data is not shared by any third party. Okay. It's between utility and the consumer.
Okay.
The moment it goes outside of them to a third party, That's when you have.
All right. Well, it's tricky, but that's the compressor going off as a clue to an inefficient appliance.
Right.
That's a great example. Typically, utilities, most of their programs that I've observed over the last decade are typically energy efficiency programs. And we were talking earlier, there's one of the reasons why this is complicated and nuanced is because energy efficiency is no longer the same. It's not interchangeable with decarbonization. You can imagine EVs charging in EVs seem like a great solution, but if they're charging off of a coal plant, it's not the greatest emissions.
It's the other way around.
Well,
it's now hurting you.
Decarbonization is not the same as energy efficiency. So, and they're not making energy efficiency goals, they're making decarbonization goals. So can you tell me a little bit about how they're thinking, if they're making these 3 to 5 year plans, and what and how they can innovate and what they can do?
They are yet to figure that out. So like we were talking, their lowest hanging fruit was to go fix the supply profile. And they're going to come to what do I do with consumer? But I'll tell you an immediate problem that they're going to hit, or we already hit him on. Let's say across a DSM portfolio of energy efficiency, they are doing behavior programs at 2 or 3% energy savings, and some of the other programs at a higher percent savings. When you send a report to somebody saying, hey, you are efficient or you are inefficient, one of the either ways, they're only using the total house energy consumption. Now, let's say I bought a car. I bought an electric vehicle. Obviously, my consumption will go up because I'm charging at home.
Sure, and you look less efficient, right? Less efficient. But you're not buying gasoline.
Yeah, but my utility sends me a message. Hey, Abhay, I think you've become very inefficient in the last 3 months, and I'm going to turn back and say, what are you guys talking? I didn't trust you before. Now I don't trust you even more, right? Mm-hmm. So to not fall into that trap of losing the customer confidence by sending them completely inaccurate stuff like this,
right? You
need to know your customer.
Did you leave? They're asking if you left your pool pump on, and in fact,
I'm charging my car. So now they need to know their customer better by saying, your consumption went up because you bought a car. Hey, congratulations! Here is $500. Instead of giving me the fact that I'm inefficient, they should be giving me the $500, which is generally available incentive, right? For example, when I bought my car for 6 months, I had no clue. And then somebody else told me, hey, there is $600 waiting for you at PG&E. And then I applied and they gave me the money. So, because they didn't know I had an EV, right? So I would say that's why.
But shouldn't that just come with when you buy an EV, it should come with your utility package? Wouldn't a progressive utility do that?
If only the world was so organized, right? But we're trying to make it organized by detecting who has EV. So what we are doing in this, when we change energy efficiency to decarb or carbon measure. So we are introducing this measure, which is equivalent of a carbon score. And that measure is not dependent on your only consumption. It is dependent on your activities, which are carbon measure. Right? Your lifestyle, so if you're using more, sure, you're generating more carbon footprint. But rather, if you generated all your energy on your roof through solar, then using more is okay because you didn't put extra carbon footprint.
Sure.
Now, if you bought a car and your consumption went up, your carbon emissions went down, even though your energy consumption went up because you went from gasoline to the car. Mm-hmm. So identifying these trends with data, having your data, figuring out, hey, Eric, you bought a car. Okay, great. Your score went up. No, it's like your credit score. This is your carbon score. Your score went up. And you start charging your car in the peak hours. Hey, your score went down. Eric, can you move your charging to these hours? Okay, you move those charging to those hours and your score went up again. And if you put solar on your roof, your score went up a lot, right? So this is carbon game. This is not energy efficiency game, right? And that needs data.
But the way most adults keep score is not with their eco score, but with their dollar score.
Like we are working with a utility on the East Coast where we are giving incentive, or they are giving incentive every month for consumers to charge your car in the off-peak hours. Now, any consumer who charges their car more than 3 times in the peak hours does not get the $20 a month. But if they keep their car charging within off-peak hours, I would say just 1 or 2 strikeouts, they get the $20 a month. It's an incentive-based gamification method to keep people from charging their car in the off-peak hours. And then we are going to introduce more of managed charging. Hey, you share your car's APIs. Just like you connect your bank to your TurboTax or things like those.
Yes.
You can connect your car to Bidgely's platform, which is utilities platform in return, and we will make sure that your car is always charged in the off-peak
the
hours.
right times.
Now, if you were charging your car in the peak hours, you would be paying more money. So, and by the way, every time you charge car, it's an expensive fare. Like you could be paying $5 versus $12 or $6 versus $12. $5 or $6 is actually not a trivial amount for each. You know, people drive a mile more to get 10 cents less. I do that. I've done that.
Okay.
Right. So $5 out of 10, like 5 versus 10 is or 7 versus 15 is a big deal when you're charging your car one time.
Sure.
That is monetary. You don't need to put gamification or other incentives.
The potato chip industry invests 10% of their revenue in R&D. Every industry, even archaic industries, invest enormous amounts of money in R&D. Utilities are not leaders in this regards, and they invest somewhere between 0 and 1% of their money in R&D, and they have to rely on outside innovation. They don't have it in-house. So your customers are utilities, are they not?
Yeah.
When you knock on their door, they say, they say, oh, thankfully the data scientists are here, or do they say, do they close the curtains and pretend they're not at home?
I wish it was like that, but here's the two-sided problem. Many utilities who have now hired those, for the good reason, they have hired those chief digital officers
from
chief CDOs and CI, chief digital officer and chief innovation, IT officer, whatever, right? They have hired these people from outside, and these people know that I have to build a large data lake and bring some analysts and data scientists. So they are investing. So first part is they are investing. Okay. But the second part is obviously...
and you are, in a sense, competing against their in-house efforts to some extent.
No, we're not competing, but sometimes it's perceived as we are competing. But there's a difference. For example, if you hire data analysts who are equipped and trained to slice and dice the data in 50 different ways, what we have done is we have created, like we talked about load disaggregation, right? Load disaggregation is to extract signatures. Like that is not as same as slicing and dicing the data. So for example, if somebody says, hey, Eric, here's $5 million. Can you go develop voice recognition? The same as Alexa and Google Home, right? That took them 10 years and probably $500 million of investment to develop the voice recognition enough to a point where you can use it in the field. So we create a layer of information from their data and we hand it over to them. Now their data analysts are turbocharged 5x because now they have information that was never sitting in their database. So previously they were slicing, dicing the data. Now they are slicing and dicing information, right? So they didn't know Eric had EV, or they didn't know Eric has efficient or inefficient AC, but now they have it information. Now they can do slicing and dicing to do many things. So we want that investment from their side because now we are on the same side of the table. Now it's just a question of, okay, we share 40% and you take 60, or we take 60 and you take 40. But at least we're on the same side of the table, right? Okay. So those are the changes that are happening. Now, of course, smaller industries, smaller utilities don't have the money because it's an expensive affair to invest in your own data lake. It like starts at $10 or $20 million investment or larger, and smaller ones don't have that money. The larger ones do. Okay. So that's what is happening behind the scenes.
We're on the cusp of some big changes happening in society in terms of customer awareness, in terms of what people drive and how their approach to their energy usage. Can you tell us a little bit about what acting now will prepare us for in 3 to 5 years?
Most utilities, and if I'm in their place, I would probably do the same, are looking at some analyst reports to say, hey, what's the uptake of electric vehicle? And it differs state by state, but sooner or later it's moving up. And they make a certain planning to say, okay, if the next 3 years, this is only this much adoption, et cetera, et cetera. What our research in our circle of people who are investing in EVs, people who are driving the regulation here, and especially if you heard the Biden administration announcement to say by 2030, we want 50% of the cars selling on the road with EV. Our theory is that the adoption of EV is going to be faster than what is being predicted right now. And people are getting over their range anxiety of how far they'll go. Would I have chargers? I mean, there'll be 500,000 chargers installed on this highways, in the next, 5 to 10 years. So the moment these things are gone, there is absolutely no reason for somebody to not buy an EV. I'll give you an example. When I charge my car in the off-peak rate today, it costs me $7 to charge a full tank of 300 miles. And when I charge my other car, which is a hybrid SUV, so it's it's a high CV, but it's a hybrid. So I still get about 22, 24 miles per gallon, which is not bad for an SUV. It cost me $45 to get the same 300 miles. There is a clear incentive here. So we think the adoption rate is will be faster than what they're predicting. And that is why most utilities should do it now, because it will hit them sooner than they think it will hit them.
And the potential for, I know it sounds a little science fiction-y, but the potential for bidirectional V to grid is not out of the question, and utilities would want to be ahead of that curve for sure.
Yeah, that will help them quite a bit. That's actually what I call the back pocket solution to more EVs. But if I can balance between the cars and V2G, that's great. The question is, when do car manufacturers start allowing them? Because the previous theory was
the battery ownership, battery liability, and warranty for sure.
So only when car manufacturers start allowing the bidirectional, charging on and off, whatever, from the cars.
So the answer to why now is because things are going to be happening a lot faster than it's forecasted.
Right.
So Abhay, we've had a good conversation about decarbonization versus energy efficiency, some of the steps that utilities are taking to better engage with their customers. We've talked about the upcoming tidal wave of EVs that's going to change the way utilities do business. Could you give us a little bit of tell us what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, and a bit of a call to action on what utilities are really being faced with over the next couple of years, and how they can, again, they're not going to be able to do this without working with their customers. No industry can. How can they better improve their relationships with their customers? And what are we going to see from progressive utilities in the coming years?
It's a good question. Summarizing what we talked, it's going to be challenging. Things which were not challenging utilities before, which means the scenario of being comfortable where they were will make it uncomfortable for them because of the EV adoption, grid pressure, solar adoption. And a very easy example is you have a lot of cars on the grid, and there's a long weekend coming, and everybody's charging their car on Thursday and Friday of the long weekend. But hold on, it becomes cloudy, and your supply goes down and your demand goes up. So those kind of situations will be there, which they didn't have before. So they have to become more consumer interactive. And the best way to do this is through data. Like, you can't become randomly, you cannot just start, hey consumer, I want to interact with you, right? The only way to interact with consumer is, hey, I know this is who you are and I want to offer you something nice. And in order to know who your customer is, you have to use data. And so I would say utilities who are not using the data, start using the data, because you have all the data in your vault, right? And the ones who are using it, use more of it. Learn your customers, who they are, offer them things which they care about, saving money, conveniences, the equity, like we talked about, the low income customers.
But these tools are here today, right? Most of these data analytics, data scientists are here today, and it's a matter of changing utility culture and utility engagement with their customer to make this happen.
Right. I think it's a combination of utility culture from top down, which is happening there, and then the necessary factor, which comes from the outside, which doesn't allow them to stay status quo. So the two things together, and look, we can't forget the fact that if the utility industry was running at 10 miles per hour, you can't make them run at 100 miles per hour instantly. It will take them, unfortunately, it's not an EV, which goes really fast in acceleration. It will take them 5 years or 4 years to go from 10 to 50 miles per hour. But as long as they do that, I think then it's fine.
All right. Thanks, Abhay.